Today, in The Lost of Testimony, we delve into one of the most chilling and inexplicable enigmas of modern history, the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass. Prepare yourselves for a narration that defies all logic and that, to this day, remains without a definitive answer, an X-file of real life that keeps investigators and enthusiasts alike in suspense. This case, beyond the human tragedy, is a reminder that there are forces and events that escape our understanding. Winter of 1959, in the remote and desolate Ural Mountains, in the heart of the Soviet Union, 9 experienced young hikers, led by the charismatic Igor Dyatlov, venture into the relentless snow and cutting blizzards, seeking to complete a challenging mountain ski route to the summit of Kolatsiak. This mountain, whose name in the local Mansi dialect is translated ominously as the Mountain of the Dead, already carried a veil of superstition and warning. Equipped with the best material of the time for extreme cold and prepared for a Category 3 expedition, the highest level of difficulty for ski mountaineering at that time, these students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, with their youth, audacity, unwavering ambition, and a deep love for nature, promised to return with an epic story of overcoming and camaraderie. However, what they found in those icy summits, what they experienced in the white desolation of the Urals, transcended any imaginable human challenge, transforming into a chronicle of unspeakable horror. It was an event that neither forensic science, nor the coldest logic, nor the sharpest reason have been able to completely unravel, leaving a legacy of unanswered questions that persists to this day. The weeks passed, and with each day that evaporated on the calendar, the promise of his return was transformed into a growing anguish. The silence on the radio, which at first was attributed to the technical difficulties of the mountainous terrain, became more and more deafening. The expected date for his return, February 12, arrived and went without the slightest sign, without a single message, without a trace. The alarm finally went off, and large-scale search and rescue operations were launched, involving volunteer students who knew the missing persons well, military units with their specialized equipment, and a rudimentary aviation that combed the icy skies, defying the storms. The ground teams, facing brutal temperatures that approached 30° C, and fierce blizzards that swept the white immensity, combed every square meter of that implacable terrain. And finally, on February 26, the first and most disturbing finding that would forever change the world's perception of this expedition and the fate of its members, a tent, almost completely covered by snow, but visibly abandoned on a slope of Kolatsiak, at almost 1.5 kilometers from the summit. Hope vanished, giving way to a premonition of disaster. The scene inside and around the tent was of absolute chaos, an image frozen in time, a perfect snapshot of primordial panic and despair. The most unsettling thing is that the canvas of the tent appeared torn, not from the outside by an external force or the attack of some animal, but unmistakably from the inside, with wide, abrupt, and violent cuts, in a desperate and hasty way. It was as if the young people had fled, terrified in the middle of the night, in the midst of the most implacable blizzard and the most devastating cold. Without time to open the zipper or untie the bindings, the investigators found all their essential belongings inside. Heavy outerwear, leather hiking boots, backpacks full of provisions, food, the valuable skis, even a pair of flashlights and the personal diaries that documented their journey up to that point. They had escaped in what appeared to be sleepwear or very light garments, leaving behind everything that could have protected them from the deadly cold. What overwhelming force, what kind of absolute terror could force 9 experienced mountaineers, aware of the dangers of the cold, to abandon their only refuge in the deepest darkness, in one of the most hostile and lethal climates on the planet? The question echoed in the icy air, without finding the slightest logical answer. The partial and heartbreaking answer came with the discovery of the bodies, scattered in the desolate snowy landscape. First, under an enormous cedar pine, 1.5 kilometers from the tent, 2 of them were found. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were barefoot, dressed in light underwear and with clear signs of having tried, desperately, to make a bonfire with broken branches that they themselves had climbed to cut. An agonizing and vain attempt to combat hypothermia. His hands and feet presented severe burns, indicating atrocious suffering in his last hours. Shortly after, at different distances from the tent and in positions that suggested an agonizing and failed attempt to return to the shelter, 3 other bodies were found. That of the leader Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Everyone was in postures that indicated an exhausting fight against the storm. Exhausted, defeated by the cold and exposure. The most terrifying thing is that some corpses were barefoot under extreme temperatures of 30°C, or even lower, as if they had escaped from something so imminent and frightening that freezing or death by exposure were not their main concern at that moment of desperate flight. The despair etched on their frozen faces and their final postures was a silent and unbearable testimony to the last moments of horror they experienced on the Mountain of the Dead. But the story only became darker, more incomprehensible and enigmatic, with the spring findings, when the relentless thaw revealed the 4 remaining bodies, hidden under a thick layer of snow in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar pine, in a place difficult to access. And here's where the mystery becomes truly disturbing, defying all rational explanation and pushing the investigators to the limit of their understanding. Several of them had brutal internal fractures, but without visible external wounds that could explain such catastrophic damage. Nikolai Thibault-Brignot presented a severe head trauma, a skull fracture as intense as if he had been hit with immense force, not at all compatible with a simple fall. Alexander Kolevatov and Semyon Zolotaryov had massive fractures in their chests and ribs, with multiple broken ribs so severe that, according to the coroners, they would have been caused by a crushing pressure equivalent to that of a high-impact car accident or a fall from a considerable height. Who or what could inflict such catastrophic wounds without leaving a single scratch on the skin, without breaking a shirt, without tearing off a button, without leaving evidence of a superficial struggle? It was as if they had been crushed by an invisible force, immaterial but immensely powerful, that acted directly on their internal organs and bones, without damaging the exterior. And the most macabre proof, the most grotesque and disturbing detail that still today continues to freeze the blood of those who know the case. One of them, Ludmila Dubinina, was found without a tongue, without eyes, and with part of her lips and facial tissue missing. His companion, Semyon Zolotaryov, had also lost his eyeballs, inexplicably, without scavenger animals being able to explain such precision. Furthermore, strange marks and inexplicable bruises were found on the bodies, some of which were never satisfactorily explained by forensic investigators, not even with the most advanced techniques. Some presented unusual colorations on the skin, an orange-reddish tone or even a slight purple tint, which only intensified the enigma and fueled the most outlandish and conspiratorial theories, suggesting an exposure to something unknown. From these chilling and disconcerting discoveries, theories multiplied uncontrollably, each one more implausible, more disturbing than the last, desperately trying to give shape to the incomprehensible. Were there secret Soviet military experiments in the area, and did the hikers stumble upon something they shouldn't have seen, being eliminated for that reason to silence them? Or perhaps a brutal attack by a Mansi tribe? Despite the fact that the official investigation completely exonerated them and no additional traces or traditional weapons were found at the scene, was it a sudden and silent slab avalanche that forced them to flee in panic? Although the tent was not buried and the tracks moved away in a straight descending line, not typical of an avalanche that would drag the bodies and destroy the camp. Some spoke of attacks by wild animals, but the nature of the injuries, without claws or bites, and the absence of large animal tracks quickly refuted that possibility. And even there were those who, desperate for an explanation, dared to whisper about paranormal phenomena, an ancient force, a yeti, or an extraterrestrial entity operating in the mysterious Mountain of the Dead. A legend that took on a new and terrifying dimension. The intrigue increased exponentially when more details were revealed that Soviet censorship tried to hide and suppress from public opinion. The subsequent analyses detected radiation in the clothing of some of the hikers at significant and abnormal levels, which further fueled the suspicions of Soviet secret weapons tests or some type of nuclear contamination in the area, possibly an explosion, unknown experimental of military nature that caused an event to which the hikers could not survive. Furthermore, in the days before and after the incident, sightings of bright spheres and strange lights of an unidentified nature were recorded in the night sky by other groups of hikers and locals in the region, accounts that were dismissed but that they resurfaced over time. Could these young people have witnessed something they shouldn't have seen? Something of human or non-human origin that sealed their fateful destiny and led them to such a violent and mysterious death? As of today, the Dyatlov Pass remains one of the greatest enigmas in Russian history, a Gordian knot of terror, bewilderment, and conspiracy that resists being completely untied. Despite decades of investigation and speculation, the official investigation of 1959 closed in a hurry with an ambiguous result, concluded that the cause of the deaths was an irresistible natural force, a phrase as vague as it was convenient that generated, as was to be expected, many more questions than conclusive answers. And the most disturbing thing, despite the declassification of some files over the years, the intervention of new researchers, the review of modern experts, and the application of advanced forensic technology, not even these documents have managed to give us a definitive answer, and conclusive, leaving a veil of impenetrable mystery over what really happened that fateful night on the Mountain of the Dead. The victims of the Dyatlov Pass took their secret to the grave, and we, decades later, can only speculate and feel the chill of the indescribable terror they experienced, a terror that still today, in the loss of testimony, resonates in the silent snow of the Urals.